Hello and welcome to CyberByteFM, your ultimate source for cybersecurity, privacy, compliance, AI, and threat intelligence. Get expert insights, breaking news, and practical tips to stay one byte ahead in the digital world. Unlock the code to safer systems, decode the threats shaping tomorrow. Hit subscribe and join the frequency. Look, the headline from the July intelligence data is, well, it represents a structural shift. We are now observing autonomous agentic AI workflows mapping, compromising, and exfiltrating multi-tenant cloud environments in under 72 hours.
That is correct. Analysis of the July 2026 incident response metrics confirms that the attacker dwell time required for full compromise has effectively been reduced by a factor of 10.
A factor of 10. That is the macro reality we are operating in today. We're no longer dealing with human adversaries who need weeks to sift through directories and figure out where they landed. We're defending against machine speed execution.
The telemetry confirms a complete operational acceleration.
Right. But before we get to the AI acceleration that is upending cloud security, we have to address a systemic failure at the absolute bottom of the technology stack. The traditional perimeter is entirely obsolete. Adversaries are no longer attempting to breach the application layer.
They are establishing persistent footholds within the physical hardware and legacy protocols that route the traffic.
Exactly. And the July 9 joint advisory from CISA and allied international agencies gives us the empirical data on this.
Russian intelligence-linked actors are actively compromising enterprise edge routers by targeting legacy management configurations. Specifically, they are exploiting default or weak simple network management protocol, or SNMP, configurations.
Right, alongside those legacy Cisco Smart Install features. So for the executives listening, SNMP is the protocol your IT operations team uses to monitor the health and performance of network hardware.
And when administrators leave the default community string active,
which acts as the authentication passphrase, right? When that is left active, they are essentially leaving a master blueprint of the internal network publicly accessible. Attackers query the router, they map the exact topology, and then they weaponize features like Smart Install to overwrite the device's configuration files entirely.
Once configuration control is achieved, the actors utilize the Trivial File Transfer Protocol, or TFTP, to exfiltrate the existing config, inject malicious routing logic, and re-upload the file,
establishing covert tunneling directly at the routing layer.
Precisely. Telemetry indicates these compromises bypass all conventional endpoint detection and response platforms. EDR agents simply cannot be deployed on proprietary router firmware.
Look, this represents a total failure of network visibility. If the attacker owns the router, they own the flow of packets. They can mirror traffic, bypass segmentation, and maintain persistence for months without generating a single alert in your SIEM.
It requires an immediate strategic response from infrastructure teams.
It does. Organizations operating critical infrastructure must mandate SNMPv3, which enforces cryptographic authentication and payload encryption, and they have to unconditionally disable TFTP and Smart Install on internet-facing infrastructure.
But this foundational risk is not isolated strictly to network hardware.
No, it's not. We are seeing identical systemic vulnerabilities across the core enterprise software platforms that actually run the business. For example, SAP recently disclosed a critical remote code execution vulnerability residing in the SACS-attach executable.
That tool is a core component of the SAP Change and Transport System, which manages the migration of code and configurations across development, quality assurance, and production environments.
Which means a vulnerability there is a direct threat to corporate financial integrity. This is the pipeline that pushes updates into your ERP environment.
An authenticated attacker with low privileges can exploit this to execute arbitrary operating system commands on the SAP central instance.
Right. They can inject malicious transports directly into the production environment. They are manipulating supply chains, altering financial ledgers, or deploying ransomware at the exact center of your business operations. It completely subverts the separation of duties.
Additional infrastructure platform risks documented this month include a critical cross-site scripting vulnerability in Zimbra's classic web client and a severe HTTP API flaw in RabbitMQ.
RabbitMQ handles the asynchronous communication between microservices. It is the central nervous system of modern distributed cloud architectures.
The vulnerability there permits unauthorized cross-tenant message routing within the message broker's administrative endpoint.
If that API is exposed and multi-tenant isolation fails, data meant for one customer's microservice can be routed to an entirely different tenant. That is a catastrophic confidentiality breach, especially for SaaS providers.
Between SAP, Zimbra, and RabbitMQ, the mandate for IT operations is clear. These are not routine patch cycles.
No, these are immediate drop-everything remediation events. You have to validate that none of these administrative interfaces are exposed to the public internet. But look, when infrastructure hardening forces adversaries to shift tactics, they don't just give up.
The data shows they pivot directly to the software supply chain. The objective is to bypass enterprise defenses entirely by compromising external developer tools.
Right, the dependencies that organizations integrate into their proprietary code bases. This brings us to the sophisticated compromise of the JScrambler NPM package.
Developers utilize JScrambler legitimately to obfuscate JavaScript and protect intellectual property. However, threat actors successfully publish malicious versions of this specific package to the public registry.
And the forensic breakdown of that malicious payload is severe. It reveals heavily obfuscated setup scripts designed to execute automatically upon installation.
Those scripts deployed cross-platform infostealer binaries specifically engineered to target developer workstations and continuous integration servers.
They are hunting for the keys to the kingdom. These infostealers aren't just scraping basic passwords anymore.
Telemetry shows they are systematically harvesting browser session tokens, crypto wallets, cloud access keys, and crucially configuration files for AI coding assistance.
This is a massive shift in targeting. Developers are heavily reliant on AI tools like GitHub Copilot or internal enterprise AI assistants. If an attacker extracts the authentication tokens for those AI assistants, they gain direct read access to the organization's private repositories.
It is an entirely new, highly efficient vector for source code and intellectual property exfiltration, and these supply chain vulnerabilities extend to the repository hosting platforms themselves.
Right, like CVE 2026-200896. This impacts the official Docker image for Gitea, which is a widely deployed open-source version control platform.
The vulnerability exists within its default reverse proxy authentication configuration.
And reverse proxy authentication is standard architectural practice. The load balancer handles the SSL termination and verifies the user, then passes a specific HTTP header to the backend application to confirm the identity.
In this case, the xWebAuth user header. The fundamental flaw here is that the Gitea container failed to validate the origin of that header.
Exactly. So by default, the application trusted the header regardless of the source IP address.
Consequently, an unauthenticated external attacker could transmit a crafted HTTP request directly to the Gitea instance, inserting the header as admin, and the system would instantly grant full administrative privileges,
Exposing private repositories and CI/CD secrets immediately. This highlights a dangerous assumption in modern infrastructure, trusting internal network boundaries without mutual TLS or strict IP validation.
It creates a severe operational dilemma. We mandate that teams rapidly patch and update dependencies.
But when the registries and the repositories themselves are poisoned, standard vulnerability management fails. How do you trust the tools you use to build your tools?
Mitigation requires cryptographic assurance. Organizations must enforce pipeline integrity checks to ensure the code reviewed in the repository matches the compiled artifact.
And dynamic generation of software bill of materials, right?
Yes. Continuous auditing of SBOMs is necessary to track transient dependencies like JScrambler across the development lifecycle.
Look, once threat actors harvest these developer credentials and session tokens from the supply chain, they immediately initiate lateral movement.
The infrastructure and supply chain compromises are ultimately just delivery mechanisms. The primary objective is identity takeover.
Exactly. And the exploitation of the Opera GX browser provides a technical case study on how identity is being targeted right now.
A vulnerability patch this month allowed malicious domains to leverage cascading-style sheets to silently execute unauthorized code and install browser modifications without user consent.
The mechanics of this are highly sophisticated. We usually think of CSS as harmless styling code, but modern CSS attribute selectors can be weaponized.
Attackers use this CSS injection to brute force and leak string values rendered on the page, specifically targeting the signed-in user's Gmail address.
While Opera GX is marketed toward gamers, the risk profile intersects heavily with enterprise security because of shadow IT and profile reuse.
Threat intelligence indicates high rates of credential reuse among engineering demographics. Leaking a high-value corporate Gmail address via this CSS state leak pipelines that identity directly into targeted automated campaigns.
Which leads into the sheer industrialization of identity attacks we are seeing. Huntress recently published telemetry detailing widespread automated password spray campaigns targeting the Microsoft Azure command line interface.
The Azure CLI is foundational for cloud engineers managing infrastructure as code. The threat actors are specifically enumerating and exploiting deprecated OAuth flows.
Because legacy authentication protocols lack support for modern security controls.
Correct. They completely bypass conditional access policies and multi-factor authentication enforcement.
This is a critical architectural debt issue. Organizations invest millions in hardware security keys, assuming their identity perimeter is secure. But if they fail to disable legacy authentication endpoints,
Threat actors simply route their automated attacks through the unprotected legacy protocols.
using massive data sets of storing credentials, often harvested from infostealer malware like Vidar, and feeding them into automated scripts. It is a volume-based attack.
Security architecture teams must unconditionally eliminate all deprecated authentication flows across the cloud environment.
Enforce MFA universally at the protocol level, and shift detection engineering toward identifying session hijacking rather than just initial authentication logs. Which brings us to the operational reality that connects every single one of these vectors.
The economic cost of executing them is trending towards zero.
Because of the integration of artificial intelligence into offensive cyber operations, we are witnessing a fundamental paradigm shift.
I will provide a 30-second cautionary tale based on a specific breach in the July data. A documented incident response engagement detailed a lone adversary utilizing autonomous agentic AI workflows to execute a total compromise of a large-scale AWS environment.
All in under 72 hours.
The AI ingested compromised IAM credentials, automatically enumerated S3 buckets and relational database services, identified privilege escalation paths through misconfigured IAM roles, established cross-account persistence, and executed the data exfiltration scripts entirely autonomously.
Look, we have to break down how this alters risk calculation for the board. An agentic AI is not a chatbot. It is a goal-oriented autonomous system.
The operator provides a high-level directive, and the AI recursively plans and executes the necessary steps at machine speed.
IBM's 2026 X-Force Threat Intelligence Index corroborates this exact acceleration. Their telemetry demonstrates a sharp increase in initial access operations driven by AI-enabled reconnaissance.
Furthermore, the data indicates operators of infostealer malware are actively prioritizing the theft of session tokens specifically for generative AI services.
They are compromising corporate AI accounts to access prompt histories, ingest proprietary training data, and use the enterprise's own compute resources to model further attacks. It acts as an unprecedented force multiplier.
Which is exactly why the geopolitical response to this capability is introducing severe regulatory and operational risks for enterprise security teams.
In late June, the United States government intervened directly in the commercial AI sector. They ordered Anthropic to immediately suspend foreign access to its most advanced frontier models, Fable 5 and Mythos 5.
The federal mandate cited strict dual-use national security concerns, effectively classifying the model's capabilities as strategic assets.
They are treating these frontier neural networks as digital munitions because they offer automated machine speed capabilities for vulnerability discovery and exploit generation.
Following the order, Anthropic disabled global access and implemented a heavily restricted trusted partner regime. This framework limits API access exclusively to domestic organizations that pass rigorous oversight and compliance audits.
The secondary market impact was immediate. Access to these models can now be revoked instantaneously based on geopolitical export controls.
This is a critical supply chain risk for the modern security operations center. Security vendors are increasingly reliant on frontier models like Fable 5 to analyze logs and automate threat hunting.
If your detection engineering pipeline is dependent on an API that is suddenly restricted, say your third-party vendor loses their trusted partner status, your security operations are instantly degraded.
The operational dependency on these models must be quantified immediately.
Exactly. If you're building a briefing deck for the executives or your team, here are 3 bullets to copy-paste. First, immediately audit all edge network infrastructure. Mandate SNMPv3 cryptographic authentication, disable legacy protocols like TFTP, and isolate administrative interfaces from the public internet to prevent foundational hardware compromise.
Essential for protecting the routing layer.
Second, assume the software supply chain is compromised. Implement strict cryptographic verification for all CI/CD pipelines, continuously generate SBOMs, and enforce zero-trust principles for internal repository access to mitigate the impact of poison dependencies.
Cryptographic assurance is the only valid mitigation there.
Third, comprehensively map your organization's reliance on frontier AI models across all business units and security tools. Develop immediate contingency plans and fallback capabilities to maintain operations in the event that geopolitical export controls suddenly sever access to key AI infrastructure.
The telemetry dictates that defensive postures must evolve simultaneously on two completely different fronts.
Right. Security teams must enforce rigorous hygiene at the most basic levels of legacy infrastructure, while simultaneously developing governance frameworks for autonomous AI agents. The perimeter is gone, replaced by a hyper-complex web of hardware, supply chains, and digital identities, all under attack at computational speeds.
The data is definitive on that transition.
Which leaves us with a material question regarding the future of these geopolitical controls. The U.S. government successfully restricted access to commercial frontier models using trusted partner regimes. But the open source community is actively training increasingly capable models. When decentralized, open-weight AI architectures inevitably achieve the exact same dual-use, autonomous offensive capabilities as Fable 5, traditional export controls will be mathematically useless. How will your organization defend against machine speed attacks when the weapon is universally available and entirely unregulated? That will define the next era of cyber risk. Hit subscribe on YouTube at CyberByteFM and join the frequency for weekly intel. That is your briefing. Stay secure.